Good morning, and welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Salt Lake City. What a treat to hear our junior singers this morning on this Mother's Day. If you are visiting with us today, you are our honored guest. Please accept my welcome to this congregation on behalf of the ministry, and I hope that you'll meet lots of fun new people while you're here today. On this Mother's Day, I bring these opening words from Leah Hart-Landsberg. On Mother's Day, let us mark how beautiful and complex it can be to mother and be mothered. To those who have mothered, we thank you. To those who rejoice in the work, the role, the presence of mothering and mothers, we celebrate with you. To those who are in the thick of parenting children of any age, we appreciate you. To those who have lost their mothers, we grieve with you. To those who experience pain at the marking of this day, we witness you. To those who are single moms, grandmoms, stepmoms, foster moms, adoptive moms, mentor moms, and spiritual moms, we need you. And to those who are pregnant with new life, both expected and surprising, we anticipate with you. May we reflect with gratitude on the wide spectrum of mothering that happens in our lives and in our communities. And now I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and let us sing together number 42, Morning So Fair to See.
On Mother's Day, our thoughts often expand beyond a one-day celebration. It expands to include a more realistic view of what motherhood entails and parenthood in general. Cherished times are dear, but there is also, in the corner of our mind, a shadow of dread that pervades every parent I have ever known. It's a realization that as parents, we are never really out of the woods, never entirely free of worry. We know too well that sorrow lies only a heartbeat away. And sometimes parents actually rehearse privately in moments that may catch them off guard, trying to imagine the unthinkable, trying to be prepared should it ever occur to them. But we can never imagine it, nor are we ever prepared. Last Monday, Carrie Black, a dear friend to this congregation, a hard-working parent in our religious education program, Carrie and her husband Calvin crossed that dreaded threshold as parents who lost a child. Their daughter, Addie, a high school senior, took her own life despite working hard, inpatient and outpatient, with great mental health professionals. Addie was deeply loved by her high school peers. She was an especially gifted artist, and our sympathy with the entire Black family will flow forevermore. May we join together in a moment of prayer and reflection. Our hearts are joined as one at this time as we honor Addie Black. We honor her spirit, whose strength and devotion bestowed blessings upon us. We acknowledge our grief and our gratitude. We hold in our hearts the ones she loved, her mom, dad, brothers, extended family, circle of friends. Life challenges us, and it blesses us. May we recall in this time of reflection that love offers infinite possibilities, but life is also fragile, and we are forced to embrace its limits. Our solitude and loneliness are not all that we are made of. A wider community of friendship beckons us. May we gather the strength to enter life more fully so that we can share and serve, so that we can bring light where there are shadows, and liberation where there is despair. Such is our prayer, our vision, our hope this day. Amen. Our reading this morning is really a pretty interesting one. It starts innocently enough. It captures an image that I think all of us can share, and that is sitting around a dining room table having dinner with our kids and, telling some stories. And we like to tell stories. And the question is, do men and women tell the same kinds of stories? There we go. The author, by the way, Margaret Rankel, is obviously a woman. I want to just make sure everybody keeps that in mind. A few years back, when there were still 3 teenagers in this house, I got a little wound up at supper one night and kept going on and on about the brilliance of a novel that I was reading by an Irish-born writer. "I can't believe you've never been there," one of my sons said. "As much as you love this stuff, I can't believe you've never been to Ireland or England." "Well, it's expensive," I said. "First, I had no money. Then I had a bunch of kids. And you all need shoes more than I need Ireland. I'll get there one day." The skeptical teen was not satisfied with this answer. "Dad biked around Europe all by himself for 9 months before he even went to college," he said. "You could have done that too if you wanted it bad enough." And it's true. My husband did, in fact, earn the money to bike his way across Europe at age 19, alone. I taught my sons to stand when an adult enters the room. I taught them to look people in the eye and extend a hand when introduced. I taught them to put their napkins in their laps, not to speak with their mouths full, to stand up for children being bullied. What I had not taught them, it suddenly dawned on me, was how it feels to go through the world as a woman. The mental calculations involved in parking a car downtown, or riding an elevator at night, or taking a walk in the woods. "It's dangerous for a woman to camp alone," I finally said at the table that night. "There are women who do it, but I'm not that brave." My children grew up with stories of their father's adventures. They did not grow up with stories of mine. I didn't tell them the story of the 16-year-old family friend who babysat while his parents and mine went out to dinner the year I was 11. How he followed me around the apartment, tugging on my blouse, telling me I should take it off, pulling at the elastic waistband of my pants and telling me I should take them off. How I finally locked myself in my bedroom and didn't come out till my parents got home. I didn't tell my children the story of walking with my friend to the town hardware store when we were 14. I didn't tell them that my friend used her babysitting money to buy a screwdriver and a deadbolt lock to keep her older brother out of her room at night. I didn't tell my children the story of my first job, the job I started the week I turned 16, and how the manager kept making excuses to go to the back to the storeroom whenever I was at the fry station, and how he would squeeze his corpulent frame between the counter and me, dragging his sweaty crotch across my rear end on each trip. I didn't tell my children about the time in graduate school when I had to call the police because there was a man crouching in the bushes next to my front step, or about the former professor who told me that my impending marriage put an end to the longest-running act of foreplay he had ever engaged in. What I had thought of as an avuncular interest in my career, he had thought of as an unrealized act of seduction. There is nothing unusual about these stories. They are ho-hum, everyday experiences of virtually every woman I know, and such stories rarely get told. There will never be a powerful social media movement that begins, "Oh, today I ate breakfast," Or today, my dog pooped and I cleaned it up. Or today, I washed my hair with the same shampoo I've been buying since 2006. We tell the stories that are remarkable in some way, stories that are surprising, utterly unexpected. The quotidian doesn't make for a good tale. And maybe that's why the avalanche of stories on Twitter and Facebook has been so powerful. It started on October 5th when the New York Times first broke the story of accusations of sexual harassment against the Hollywood producer Harvey Weinstein. But it became a juggernaut 10 days later when the actress Alyssa Milano tweeted, "If you have been sexually harassed or assaulted, write Me Too as a reply to this tweet." And within minutes, the hashtag #MeToo was all over Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Over 500,000 times on Twitter, 12 million times on Facebook in the first 24 hours alone. And the deluge shows no sign of slowing. The numbers keep ticking up as women tell the stories of men who use their power to overwhelm or coerce them. Now, I don't know any woman who is surprised by these stories or by the sheer vast numbers of them. But men are. It's an irony worth pointing out that the novel I was telling my children about at dinner that night was Room by Emma Donoghue, the story of a woman who was kidnapped from a college campus and kept as a sex slave in a backyard shed. Even reading that beautiful, heartbreaking book, it had not occurred to me to tell my children the story of all the times I wanted to go camping or hiking or traveling myself, but didn't dare because I couldn't find anyone to go with me. Well, again, a warm welcome to everyone here, especially to those who may be here for the first time or have ventured back for a second time. Awfully glad that you are with us this morning. I hope that everyone has a chance to take a look at the numerous announcements in our order of service, which really is a reflection of how vital this congregation is all year round, even though the formal worship services are kind of winding down, but this church is just kicking all the way through. It's wonderful. Next Sunday in particular, please note that following this 11 o'clock service, we will have our annual meeting, a congregational meeting, which is so important in the life of this church, where we get to decide as a congregation on all the important issues facing this church moving forward. The junior and senior high kids will be selling sandwiches after the 11 o'clock service to hold you all over for the congregational meeting, which usually doesn't last that long. We'll be starting before 12:30, and we'll be done, I'm sure, before 2. But it's so important in the life of this church. Please be here. And that Sunday morning worship service is going to include a couple of lovely things. One will be a bridging ceremony for high school kids who are graduating and then joining the young adult group. And also we're going to have a flower communion. And please bring a flower with you, kind of a long stem flower for the ceremony, and we'll explain to you what the purpose of that flower is. So maybe you can just snip one the next time you hike in the canyons. If that's allowed or not, I don't know, but just tell them it's for a communion service at my church, and I'm sure you'll let that go. And finally, I shouldn't say that. I have 2 more quick things, and that is, in 2 Sundays, we go back to our summer schedule, or I should say we begin our summer schedule of 1 service only, and that's at 10 o'clock. And so that will be the situation starting on May 27th, Memorial Day Sunday, 1 service only through the summer. The Interfaith Pride service will be held on May 31st at the Zion Lutheran Church, and there's a call out to those who may want to sing in that choir. And it's kind of a pickup choir. It's going to be a very important ingredient in that service. And please, if you are remotely interested, take a look at the back of your order service when the rehearsals are, just a couple of them. Be sure to contact Monica Dobbins and say you will lend your voice to the Interfaith Pride service. At this time, the offering will gratefully be received, a chance to greet one another, welcome each other, and wish each other a happy Sunday, happy Mother's Day. You know, I truly believe that today is the greatest Mother's Day ever. Aside from all the usual sentimentality and the collusion of the flower and greeting card industry to line their deep pockets, Mother's Day has always served another purpose for me. In 1980, I celebrated my first Mother's Day as a parent. Aside from trying to make that Sunday extra special, I couldn't help but think, was it always so difficult? This was the era in which women were brainwashed into believing they could do it all, have it all, be a supermom, top executive, and sensuous wife simultaneously. Anything shy of that benchmark was considered a failure. The true essence of Mother's Day, the true essence of Mother's Day, acknowledging a level of multitasking beyond anyone's wildest imagination, is usually concealed by the flowers and fanfare. But once we get beyond hoisting Mom on the pedestal for one brief day, it becomes transparently obvious that women pay an enormous price for moving beyond the fringe of conventional expectations. Mothers holding careers became theoretically possible once women gained an easier access to college. It seemed at the time that unlimited options for women were suddenly available. They can do anything now. Hey, they got their degree, they can just go on and do anything. But then a cruel reality hit unexpectedly in realizing there were only 24 hours in a day to juggle motherhood and career. Certainly the culture needed to change, but it didn't. And thus women began to seriously question their stamina, let alone their sanity. Has motherhood always been so difficult? Has anything changed? Let me share with you a posting I received just this past Tuesday from a very dear friend. A young woman with a 7-year-old son and 4-year-old daughter, and a wonderful, loving husband to go along with that. She was a member of this church years ago while she attended the University of Utah. She also worked as the nanny to my kids. She led the young adult group in this church. I officiated her wedding to the guy she met in law school. Oh, my God, perfect. It's just so idyllic. This is what she posted. I'm on day 9 straight of 12 to 18-hour workdays with very little sleep, 0 exercise, canceled weekend plans, solo parenting during most of that. And today I was greeted at the daycare door by Kara's teacher complaining about Kara's behavior. And the teacher asking, "Is something going on at home?" Where is the love for the hard-working mom? And it got me thinking about my bucket theory, that we all have different buckets. Mom bucket, friend bucket, attorney bucket, wife bucket, runner bucket. And they just can't all be full at once. When some are full, others are empty. There's only so much water. But come on, man. Let's help each other out. Well, that was some posting. We have yet really learned how to help each other out, man. Which gives grandparents a whole new raison d'etre. They represent the fingers plugging up the holes in the dike, trying to keep their offspring's family from drowning. I'm sure most of you don't know this, but Rabbi Ilyana Schwartzman from Congregation Kol Ami just moved a month ago, moved with her family, including her little girl, moved back east to be close to grandparents. Couldn't make it without them. About a year or so ago, the Reverend Erin Gilmore from Holiday United Church of Christ moved her young family to Colorado to be close to grandparents. Couldn't have made it otherwise. And many seniors in this congregation moved to Salt Lake City for one reason only. Help was required to care for the grandchildren. The mom bucket had just run out of water. Mother's Day has become my outlook onto the world, the outlook which sees women struggling to find some equilibrium in their overwhelming daily demands. Now, obviously, men too struggle, trying to identify their new roles for everything from nurturing to house cleaning. As women are making gains professionally, men are making gains into parenthood. That sounds fine. But societal pressure to excel at work while still receiving a passing grade from a daycare provider when you pick up your child weighs more heavily on the mom. Why is that? Perhaps because the role of women historically has left an indelible mark on our culture's conduct and behavioral patterns, and how women are perceived. This is all ingrained, how they're perceived regardless of how many letters they may have behind their names. I regard Mother's Day as a time to take the temperature of how women are faring, the issues they currently face, and the scorecard tracking their progress or not. Mother's Day today, however, reflects a markedly different view of women, which is why I consider today the best Mother's Day ever. A quick survey of dealing with the perennial issues surrounding women's equality will shed light on how recent developments hopefully bode well for a new era of women's rights, effectively ushering in a more level playing field. A good place to start might be with our own Unitarian transcendentalist Margaret Fuller. In 1839, in Boston, Margaret Fuller began hosting what were called conversations, which resembled the salons in Paris. Interested women gathered to discuss the great issues they confronted as women. Margaret Fuller, editor of the transcendentalist magazine The Dial, wrote up some of these problematic issues that surfaced during the conversations, kind of wrote them up in her magazine. And there were so many of them that it culminated in a book published in 1845 called The Great Lawsuit, a title that seems both threatening and a little foreboding. In that book, she basically asked for women to claim themselves as self-dependent, with the ultimate goal of sharing the mortgage with their spouse. That was 1845. 3 years later, 1848, Seneca Falls, New York, the first ever Women's Rights Convention. It was organized by Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. About 300 women and men attended the two-day conference. The most contentious argument on the floor was whether or not to include women's right to vote in the final document that was to be distributed nationwide. Lucretia Mott argued against the inclusion of women's suffrage for fear that it asked too much, too soon. She urged a more temperate approach to women's rights. But the only African American at the convention, Frederick Douglass, persuaded the convention to, in fact, include the right of women to vote. Put that into that final document, please. And they did. That's what they voted for. So women's suffrage at that time, women's suffrage as a concept stirred a lot of controversy around the country. But women received a slap in the face when in 1866, Congress passed the 14th Amendment, which defined citizens and voters. Defined citizens and voters as male. There it was, printed in plain sight in our U.S. Constitution. Discrimination against women was legal, but tested 6 years later when Susan B. Anthony cast her vote in the election between Ulysses S. Grant and Horace Greeley, and guess what? She got arrested. Greeley, who lost the election, was the same guy who published Margaret Fuller's book, The Great Lawsuit. Imagine if Greeley had gotten elected. Wow. But liberals, even back then, had a great deal of trouble turning our nation into a just society with equal human rights and civil rights for all people. Although voting was finally secured when the 19th Amendment was ratified in 1920, the issues confronting women remained constant. Margaret Fuller's old demand for women to become self-dependent never gained any traction. And through the 1950s, women were mostly confined to the home, to their new GE kitchens, caring exclusively for their children and hopelessly dependent economically. A new voice pierced the oppression of women when Betty Friedan published The Feminist Mystique in 1963. It kind of felt like an echo of Margaret Fuller's Conversations Among Women, only this time they were called consciousness-raising groups. Remember the consciousness-raising groups? Much like Margaret Fuller, who noted in transcendentalist language that enlightenment was needed to awaken a sleeping America, to finally wake up to the inherent rights of all people, and the need for spiritual and intellectual freedom in order for women to pursue their lives as equitably as men. Betty Friedan urged that women, at least, wake up to their own oppression suffered at the hands of a patriarchal system. The long and short of it was that Betty Friedan addressed the same issues raised by Margaret Fuller 130 years earlier. The mid to late 60s experienced a rash of new movements like the National Organization of Women, which Friedan helped get off the ground. NOW, it's the acronym, NOW offered support for women in education and employment. There was also the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, which was supposed to ban discrimination in the workplace. Planned Parenthood and distribution of the birth control pill promised women a whole new kind of freedom, a sexual freedom and greater control over their own bodies. A few years later, women supposedly gained reproductive rights with Roe v. Wade. But look where that's gone today. Old white men in Congress, various state legislatures act like dinosaurs as they cling to those old ideas of just limiting. You got to limit the rights and freedoms of women. I entered graduate school in 1972, the same year that Ms. Magazine started stirring the pot about feminism. The next year, imagine being in theological school, the next year Mary Daly published Beyond God the Father, towards a philosophy of women's liberation. Everything seemed to be changing at once: education, employment, feminism, metaphors, sexuality, spirituality, language, liberation. It felt like a swirl of activity aimed directly at moving women forward to achieve equality, justice, fairness. But just like today, the help of the courts was needed. In 1975, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional for women to be denied the right to serve on a jury. 1976, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled it unconstitutional that a woman needed the father's consent for an abortion. 1980, I became a dad and have seen gains and setbacks over the last 38 years. But even the gains, those few precious gains, are tempered by the exhaustion of mothers, much like we heard this morning from my children's nanny. So why is this the best Mother's Day ever? Because all along, in the pursuit of rights, women have endured the humiliation and the pain and shame and the indignity of male aggression. Men perpetuating violence against women was quietly accepted for centuries because it was just an aspect of society that was normalized. I mean, how could women fight it, really? Then suddenly, most apparent throughout this past year, as though a voice spoke to women out of the whirlwind, women did a lot more than lean in. They broached what was once unthinkable, confronting male sexual aggression through the force of sheer numbers. Did it kick off with Harvey Weinstein or Bill Cosby or Roger Ailes or Bill O'Reilly or Norman Polanski or Matt Lauer, Charlie Rose, Sylvester Stallone? Yes, yes, yes. Did it begin after women felt utterly demeaned by the election of Donald Trump? Yes. Did it begin with the Women's March, Pussy Hats, Time's Up, #MeToo? Yes, yes, yes. The objectification of women, rendering them helpless in sexual exploits that violated every particle of their being, has been confronted. And men with values and sensibilities as ancient as dinosaurs have fallen on the endangered species list. Men of all kinds of backgrounds and race and political parties have fallen from grace. Be they CEOs, musicians, comedians, politicians, actors, photographers, dancers, reporters, TV celebrities, Broadway celebrities, high profile, low profile, it didn't matter. And entire companies all along Silicon Valley were forced to change their habits. And large companies re-examined their gender practices. No more office parties ending at a strip club. The male harassment culture at Nike alone ended with 11 executives resigning. They may need to change their slogan to "Just do it with consent, please." The linchpin in this revolution, and it is a revolution, the linchpin is that women, by sheer volume, were finally believed. The stories that were never told were shouted out in overwhelming numbers over and over and over again. In centuries of struggle to gain the vote, employment, education, equal pay, it came down to needing to be believed. The harassment, the aggression, the sexual exploitation, the indignity, the fear, the anguish kept silent through those transcendentalist conversations in Boston, in consciousness-raising groups throughout the country, Women's Lib, Burning Bras, a number of firsts that made us think that women were gaining something. Sandra Day O'Connor, Sally Ride, Geraldine Ferrero, Madeleine Albright, Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton. None of it mattered until women were finally believed. Invincible men lost their invincibility. There has been a sea change in women's power. And this energy has spilled over into politics where the real changes will take place. Babies are now allowed on the Senate floor. Who would have thought? Certainly not Orrin Hatch. And women are running for office as mothers. They tell voters about their sick children and the prospect of losing their health insurance. Women running for governor in Wisconsin and Maryland include promotional videos of them breastfeeding. Women with young children are running for office because they know how to multitask better than any guy. Moms are running with strong statements on gun control, universal health care, and saving the earth for their children. Women will change politics, change our country, change the playing field in terms of fairness. This is the best Mother's Day ever. Change is palpable. You know, we can almost feel viscerally the shift in power. And as women are believed in telling their stories, they're now believing in themselves. They are believing in all the things their sisters of long ago had hoped for them. Mom is running for office this year. What a great Mother's Day it is. So be it. Go, Mom. Go, Mom. Let's conclude our service, please, turning our hymn books to number 110. As we extinguish the chalice, may we enlarge our compassion and nurture our minds. May heart and head unite and expand our ability to see the truth, to proclaim the truth, and to act upon the truth. May the spirit of life, of peace and joy dwell within us, lift us, and guide us. Amen.